Good morning. Welcome to Solidarity Live. I'm Alex Lawson. With me as always, Jocelyn McCurdy-Keats. And we have a great show for you today to try to get us through the end of another week of the pandemic era, where each week counts for about a year, I'd say. What do you think, Jocelyn? Is that the right
Absolutely,
math?
at least a year.
At
Maybe
least?
longer, depending on the week.
Yeah, exactly. Next week is going to be like a decade. I'm really excited for today's show. We're joined by an amazing musical guest that Jocelyn is going to introduce, and we're going to talk about the uplifting aspect of our work. And before we probably then veer off into the ranting about all of the things that have happened this week, exposing the fact that the billionaire class have contempt for everyone else, but probably dunking on Steve Bannon getting arrested by the United Postal Service as well. So that's a little comedic relief. But with that,
Really?
Jocelyn, why don't you take it from there?
So we're here with NOLAN WILLIAMS Jr., the CEO of Newark's Productions and an incredible musical genius who's been using his work to do national level activism. He's been honored by the Kennedy Center and written up all over the country and world. NOLAN, thank you so much for being here with us this morning.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
We're, I'm so impressed with what you're doing. So for those, few who don't know, NOLAN is using his musical talents to write just overwhelmingly beautiful musical scores about democracy in America. And your focus is the civil rights movement. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've been music director for an initiative at the Kennedy Center, co-sponsored by the Kennedy Center and Georgetown University, called Let Freedom Ring. It's the annual celebration of King's birthday, King's holiday. And I've been music director for 17, I think this is 18 years, 17, 18 years, something like that. And for most of those years, Georgetown University has commissioned me to write or arrange a new work that's been premiered at the Kennedy Center in the concert hall for this. So now I've got this huge body of work that deals with social justice. Many of the pieces deal with are inspired by the messages or the speeches of Dr. King. I'm always looking at the civil rights movement to find some way to shed new insight. The interesting thing about a part of history that we all kind of file away like, oh, I know about that, is to find and unearth parts of that history that we don't know about, and to shed new insight, and then to make the connection between here and now. Because when we look at what was going on from 54 to 68, and we start to compare like the death of Emmett Till to the death of Trayvon Martin, when we start to compare what happened to folk like Medgar Evers and other folk to what has happened to, or even those folk who protested at lunch counters or tried to integrate cities, to what's happening in cities all across this country now, and the way in which policing is being overly applied towards Black and brown bodies. There are lots of parallels here. And the danger about not remembering history is that we are doomed to repeat it. And that's really what inspired me also to start this work of creating these pieces. And then 2 years ago, I had the idea that, it really was time to bring some of this music together and create some kind of integrated production. And I created a production called Stirring the Waters Across America. We did it first to commemorate the 50th anniversary of King's assassination at the French Embassy here in Washington, D.C. And then last year, when I was named a social practice resident, well, I can't speak this morning, but a social practice resident at the Kennedy Center Reach, I said, I know the project I want to work on. I've been hoping to get the grant money and the support to really be able to build out Stirring the Waters Across America. And we were able to do that. We were able to do a national casting call and get the center's resources to support us doing rehearsals and ultimately a workshop. And that primed us to actually start a national tour of the show, which we kicked off in Nashville in February of this year, and we were planning on taking it all around the country. And then
oh no,
COVID-19 came. So we had one performance at Vanderbilt University, and then we had to cancel it. But, head bloodied but unbowed, me and my business partner and co-producer, Dale A. Mott of Edgewood, decided, listen, let's just convert everything to a digital format and pick one of the scenes from the show and see if we can use that as a litmus to see if we can get some traction here. And so we took the voting rights scene from the show, a piece that I wrote, commissioned by Georgetown, called I Have a Right to Vote, that essentially, get this, walks through 200 years of voting rights history in America in about 4 minutes. That's quite an ambitious, quite an ambitious undertaking, but I think we've pulled it off, and I think we have that clip to show now.
We do, yeah.
The vote is the most powerful, nonviolent tool we have in a democratic society. We must not allow the power of the vote to be neutralized. We must never go back.
1, 2, 3, 4. Voting rights we're fighting for. 5, 6, 7, 8. We cannot afford to wait. In 1865, justice was for something high. The abolitionists stood bravely to denounce the cry that we the people form the union and deserve to see for every man and woman, black or white, equality. Frederick Douglass, 1865.
I am for the immediate, unconditional, and universal enfranchisement of the black man in every state in the Union. Without it, his liberty is a mockery.
Mary Church Terrell, 1912.
What could be more absurd than to have one group of human beings who are denied rights working to prevent another group from obtaining those same rights?
To be treated as a human being. Don't you take away my dignity. In a democracy to have a voice. I got a right to vote. In 1955, equality was still denied. So freedom marches took to fighting for our civil rights. Forced our nation to confront its inhumanity. For every man and woman, black or white, that made a race. They are arrested, 1957.
Dear Martin, we know that while it's necessary to say no to racial injustice, this must be followed by a positive program of action. The struggle for the right to vote, for economic uplift of the people.
Fannie Lou Hamer, 1964.
1870, the 15th Amendment gave every man a chance to vote. And now it's 64, and they still trying to keep us away from the ballot. You say, honey, I'm behind you. Well, move. I don't want you back there. I want you to say, honey, I'm with you, and we'll go up this freedom road together.
To be treated as a human being. Don't you take away my dignity. In a democracy to have a voice. I got a right to vote. 2, 3, 4. Voting rights we're fighting for. 5, 6, 7, 8. We cannot afford to wait. Lyndon B. Johnson, 1965.
It was more than 100 years ago Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. A century has passed since equality was promised and the Negro is not yet equal. The time for justice has now come. No force can hold it back.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, 2013.
The sad irony of the court's decision today lies in its utter failure to grasp why the Voting Rights Act has proven effective. Throwing out pre-clearance when it has worked to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm.
To be treated as a human being. Don't you take away my dignity. In a democracy to have a voice. I got a right to vote. Don't
So we're back. I assume you guys love that video as much as I did. Nolan, I don't even know where to start. It really is just, it's so exciting for me, the idea that you're using your incredible musical talents to write things about this, like you were just saying, this urgent moment in history, but that are also just good. Like you're just a good composer, which is nice.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've been in this for a long time, and for 30 years, I've been committed to using my gifts towards social good. And so I started my company, New Works Productions, 18 years ago, almost 18 years ago. And we have been about the business of developing what we call inspirational arts programming in partnership with leading arts and educational and cultural institutions. That's the fancy way of saying we like to come up with great ideas and then go to organizations and say, hey, we have a great idea. Don't you think we should be doing this? Don't you think we should be talking more about social justice? And that was a harder push for George Floyd, right? So I love how now
I am
everyone
for
is
the
moving in this
immediate,
direction.
unconditional, and universal enfranchisement of the black man in every state in the union. Without it, his liberty, democracy.
What could be more absurd than to have one group of human beings who are denied rights working to prevent another group from obtaining those same rights?
Places like Jocelyn that I would like to sort of go into on this discussion, but something that you just said about uplift is where I think I will go. It's like we talk on this show a lot. We're raging against the fact that there is this small group of people who are enormously wealthy, and they are using systems of oppression to keep everyone else down, and they divide. They split up and they put people in little silos so that they can't organize. Because when a person is alone, you can ignore them. But when people are together, their voices, can't be ignored. And there's this quality of music that actually really does have that bringing people together aspect. But it can also go either way. It can actually be a force of sort of negative, but it's more like neutral blah, right? Like super popular songs that have no purpose other than, extracting wealth again. But it is one of the most, the just fundamental forms of also creating community and uplift. And I wanted to bring in this fact that Yo-Yo Ma came to my radio station, We Act Radio, and he played at We Act Radio, and our studio is in Anacostia. And it was one of the most amazing things. It was actually done through the Kennedy Center.
I know about that event. That was Art Across America event. That was what, last year?
Last year. I was going to say, I bet you were involved in it.
I was there earlier in the day when we were at the school.
Yes. So then he came to my radio station, and it was the most amazing thing I've seen, because the idea was uplift, community uplift, and community. And for people who don't know, DC, Anacostia, east of the river, is historically the most segregated part of DC. DC is a very segregated city. Still, the history of systemic racism is just right alive today. So Anacostia is not used to getting a talent like Yo-Yo Ma in, and it was amazing. But Yo-Yo Ma himself was also amazing, because he kept saying the purpose of music, if it doesn't bring people together, it's failing. And he gave this amazing speech, and everyone was like nodding along, yeah, this is, I get your words. And then he started playing, and the moment the music started, it was like that magical thing everyone who was watching was just caught, and we were all together in this moment. That power of music is, I think one of the closest things that humans have to magic. And then that you're using it to uplift is very powerful. With all of that, tell me how you, like, what brought you to see that you could use the music to actually make things better?
Yeah, there's so and scared and just really frightened for their lives, and she just started breaking out in song. And she had a way of starting rallies by singing, right? She wasn't the only one, but I just want to lift her up because I've been working a lot. I've been studying her life a lot, and I'm working on another piece called Divine Hamer Gray that is another musical project. And I've just been fascinated by her life and her example, recognizing that music is a universal language and it has the power to do so much more than we have, than we readily recognize. And so for me personally, I made the decision 3 decades ago that I could go one path with my life, and it would be a more conventional path. It would be a more industry-oriented path. And when I say industry, I mean like popular music industry-oriented path. It would be certainly more lucrative. And I dabbled in a little bit of that. And I remember like praying, like, God, if you get me out of this, like, I will like really never come back to this, not in this way. Recognizing that for me, like, to have the gifting that I have and not put it to some kind of noble purpose feels like squandering the gift. And that's not to take anything away, because I think we need all forms of music and we need stuff to dance to. And we were just talking about Chuck Brown before we came on the air, right? I mean, who from DC doesn't love go-go? I mean, come on now.
People not from DC.
People not from DC, right? Yeah. So, and transplants being people not from DC, right? But the point is that I just recognized for me that there was this calling on my life and this sense of purpose that has really taken me down the path that is not the direct path. It's more of the scenic route, right? And the circuitous route. And along the way, the kind of experiences that I've had, whether it's music directing the dedication ceremony of the King Memorial on the National Mall, or whether it is working with the city and with Deshow Productions to put on a global concert of peace to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington down on the National Mall, or whether it is bringing the community together and more than 400 voices, choristers to sing the national anthem for the MLB All-Star game a couple of years ago. I was commissioned by MLB to do that. When I start to look at those kinds of projects, like all of those projects just kind of bring such joy to my spirit, because they all have a story of how we were able to bring community together. They all have a story of how we were able to make a profound statement, and mind you, when we brought like the 400 choristers together to form a human flag on the field of the All-Star game, this was on the heels of all the controversy around Colin Kaepernick, right? So how wonderful it was to be able to create an arrangement, an a cappella arrangement of the national anthem, bring Black, white, brown people, yellow people together, and just say, listen, this anthem is all of ours, right? That to me was an important statement. And And let me just say parenthetically, I stand with Kaepernick and what, I kneel with Kaepernick, I should say. So, there's a nobler purpose, and I'm really grateful that I've been able to do that. I mentioned earlier, and I don't know if it came through clearly, but I have a new work called Divine Hamer Gray that's in development. It's around the life of Fannie Lou Hamer, Annie Devine, and Victoria Jackson Gray. And it's another look at the civil rights movement, the contested election of 1964, where these three women from Mississippi ran for Congress. And they dared to buck the system. And, these entrenched white politicians that had been empowered for many years, they really fought the system and almost won. So.
I first of all, I just feel really grateful that you are doing this work, because as I was reading about everything you've done, as I prepared, I started to think, right, back to like when I was a kid, and you start becoming aware of things, and it does happen through art and music. And I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, but Nolan has written this beautiful, what would you even call it? Like a show, a score, Still the Waters, Grace. Yeah.
Yes. I have a couple of musicals. So, there's Stirring the Waters Across America, which you can access through our newworksproductions.com website. Or if you just go to NOLANWilliamsJr.com, it leads you everywhere you would want to go. There's a new musical called Grace that was selected for the Humana Festival of New American Plays. And get this, we were 2 weeks away from opening that at Actors Theater in Louisville, Kentucky earlier this year when the pandemic came. You all see a pattern here. So we had to shut that down as well. But thankfully, we brought Carla Hall, Chef Carla Hall, on board as our culinary ambassador for that project. And when we shut that project down, we went to Carla and said, listen, we can't mount the production, but we feel like we still want, to introduce this project to the world. Would you be willing to host this on your platforms? And let's just start a live chat series. And we did that in the spring of this year. And we were just like blown away. We were hoping that we could get a few, 1,000 people to kind of tune in. Over the course of 6-7 weeks, we got like over 500,000 people globally to tune into these live chats, which said that when you start speaking about food and family and heritage, that there's something in that conversation that really does connect us all. And the powerful thing about that is that as much as we emphasize our differences and as much as we are emphasizing, the other in our society, really when we boil down to it, food, family, tradition, heritage, those are things that are central and important to every person on this planet at some level, right? And when you start having that conversation, it really does become a global conversation, especially if it's a conversation that is facilitated by music. Then now it's another tool for bringing us together and for celebrating our commonalities and not always just getting so fixated on our distinctions.
Well, and I think it's important to note that shifts, because, when I was young and naive, it's like, oh, I love the arts, but what do they accomplish? Well, they move the needle of public opinion every single time, way more effectively than people arguing with each other on Facebook or on Fox News or CNN. When you hear something as beautiful as what you create or what other artists create, your defenses are down, and it accesses that part of your brain that is susceptible to being persuaded in a beautiful, amazing way. And every great social movement in this country has had a cultural and an art movement that carried it along. I mean, you focus so much on the history of the civil rights movement. Am I talking out of turn here?
No, not at all. I mean, and King called the music like the spirituals that were reworked or the hymns that were reworked. He called that the soundtrack of the movement. And those are like such powerful words to me that always stay with me. Like this idea that this music the way in which they were able to adapt songs and make them meaningful and relevant for that moment right now. Like, we need to speak to what's happening right now. And so a song like I shall not be moved becomes we shall not be moved, or a song like ain't gonna let no jailhouse turn me around. Like, we're speaking to the fierce urgency of now, as King would say, and we're using music to make those powerful statements. And I would also say this is the wonderful thing for me about becoming more entrenched in the theater world, because my background is the church world. And Wyatt T. Walker, who was a noted musicologist around sacred music, and someone I was privileged to know and to work with when I was editing the African American Heritage Hymnal. Wyatt Walker said, if you want to know what's happening with in our community, take a look at what we're singing in our churches. And what he was speaking to was how our music has always had a very profound social gospel element to it, a sociological statement that we make through the music that we're singing, right? And then, so that's my background on one side. And now I'm returning to my days of youth, where I was involved in theater and active in that arena, and writing more theatrical works. And what I'm finding is that that's the power of theater, like to be able to speak boldly to issues, to recognize that when you put someone in a space, and we would normally think of that in a public space, but now, even if you have someone online and you have their attention for 4 minutes and 39 seconds, like with that video, you have the opportunity to persuade them. And you have the opportunity to do so in a way that is not immediately, so jolting that it causes their defenses to rise. But you have the opportunity to lull them into a place of receptivity, right? Where they can hear the message and take that piece. I have a right. You got this Stevie Wonder inspired groove. Like, how can you not like Stevie Wonder? I mean, come on now.
Not possible.
Impossible. And then we start talking about, here's what Frederick Douglass had to say. Here's what Mary Church Terrell had to say. You may not even know the name Bayard Rustin, but if you study the civil rights movement, you would know there would be no March on Washington and all the advances that King was able to make without a person, a tactician behind the scenes like Bayard Rustin, like making all of that happen, right? So now it's like 4 minutes and 39 seconds later, I'm perhaps challenged to think, well, what do I feel about this? And why in 2020 would someone be writing or releasing a song about I have a right to vote? I thought these matters were settled, right? Don't we have a Voting Rights Act? Like, aren't you able
Not
to
anymore
ballot? But it hopefully provokes thought, right? So that now we can have a conversation about, the Postmaster General was on Capitol Hill today, virtual Capitol Hill, having to explain like what's going on with these machines being shut down and removed from facilities, right? We have to have a conversation about the Supreme Court's 2013 decision that has now resulted in so many polling places being closed, particularly in Black and Brown communities. Like, what's really going on here? Is voter suppression a real thing? Well, yes, it is. And what then does that say about us as a democracy if we're not committed to everyone having a fair chance to express themselves at the ballot box and then let the outcome be what the outcome is, as opposed to denying people those rights and trying to fix the outcome,
So Nolan, I have one last question, but it's, again, we could talk the whole show with you.
I know.
It's so fun.
I'm sorry.
I'm like, Don't apologize, because I'm thinking of all sorts of fun things, like Nietzsche's quote that without music, life would be unfair. And when we had Brock Butler on, who did the intro to this, to our show, a rework of Solidarity Forever, you know, the point he was making is that the struggle that we are struggling for, if there is no art and music, then what are we fighting for? What is it if there's no beauty and it's just the ugly? It's just the voter suppression and, you know, the Bull Connors of the world and the violence. And we have to remember ourselves what it is that we're fighting for. So with that sort of ambitious sort of lead-in, what do you think you would leave our listeners with one sort of focus that you think right now your work is really trying to make everyone pay attention to, with that unique receptivity that music provides?
Yeah. So a friend of mine says, if the world is going to be saved or redeemed, it's going to be through the arts. And from the first time he dropped that on me, I've wrestled with that. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think partisan rancor is at an all-time low. And I mean that it has descended to an all-time low.
Mm-hmm.
And we've reached a point where we can't even be of two different political ideologies in the room and even begin by recognizing our common humanity and respecting our right to have our opinions. We don't even start there anymore. We start from a very dangerous place, which denies people's humanity, which reduces people to names that are inappropriate and labels that are inappropriate. And I fear that the only way forward is going to be a more progressive and intentional move through the arts to try to facilitate conversations using mediums that hopefully make us more receptive to hear and to think and to challenge our perspectives. And that's what I'm doing, man. I mean, from now till I breathe my last, that's the work I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be doing it whether it's popular, whether it's not, whether I'm making a whole lot of money, whether I'm not. I'm grateful to organizations like Bohemian Foundation and to David Frederick and Sophia Lynn and to my partner, business partner and co-producer, Dale Mott in Edgewood, and my company, New Works Productions, who made this project happen with I Have a Right to Vote. And we need more people to kind of support the arts like that, because it's the hope that we have for redemption of our society.
Nolan Williams Jr., which you can find all of this, nolanwilliamsjr.com. It was such a pleasure talking with you. What we, I think, in summation of our conversation, what Jocelyn and I always say, is that it's only through solidarity, through community, through coming together, that we can get through these very difficult and dangerous times that we find ourselves in. Nolan, thank you so much for joining us on Solidarity Live.
I'm so honored to have been with you. Thank you so much, Alex and Jocelyn. Thank you,
Nolan. Everyone, please go find Nolan. Where should people go to the New Works website or your website? I know everyone's going to want to see everything you do.
Go to nolanwilliamsjr.com and then you'll see the I Have a Right to Vote video. There's something about Grace, the musical, something about Divine Hammer Gray, something about Stirring the Waters. Like, that's the kind of landing place, and it'll lead you wherever you want to go. But we really do want you to help us make I Have a Right to Vote like completely viral. So please like it, share it, post it, keep tweeting, retweeting, tell your family, your friends, even your frenemies. Tell them about it.
Thank you. I'll do that. Bye, Nolan.
Blessings.
So
what, Jocelyn? That was pretty good about our
that's everything he said is you know what I'm going to say. What is the point of any of this?
Played by the IWW. It's not like it's, you know, it's the
Yes.
it helped bring workers together. You know, during the civil rights era, obviously, tons of music, but prior to the civil rights era, and you know, eras are very fungible. You know, when do they start? When do they end? When it was deeper in Jim Crow, the struggle against Jim Crow, and you couldn't see the end of that. That especially is when music is also so important to continue a thread, a continuous thread, the ability to actually tell our stories for the future. We're often not able to see whether our way out of things, right? It's not obvious the way out of things. So it's important that we record now and also what got us here and are able to tell that into the future. All of that is in music and arts. And it's just at protests, it's chanting, right? I mean, like, this is part of what the power of solidarity, when you are standing shoulder to shoulder, if everyone was just kind of standing there in silence, it'd be awkward. And so you're not, you're chanting, you're creating the group that's larger than the individual, bringing people together. So I just love the ability to talk about, you know, he has such a very good and redeeming focus with his music. I might come at it a little more hard-edged than him and a little bit more punk rock, and we need a little bit of in-your-face brass knuckles on things, but I can only do that knowing that there is the beauty aspect as well that we are actually fighting for.
You mean brass knuckles as opposed to a brass band?
Yeah, and I love brass band as well. And but yes, there is no point unless you're the ugly, unless you're the people who are the Bull Connors cracking heads to ensure that Black Americans can't vote, or the Stephen Miller become a monster.
Right, or that it starts
that
back.
Is what the beauty pulls us back from. Sorry.
And no, it's okay. It's just I'm really happy to be here as always, but I feel like this is like, if you and I could talk about nothing else for 30 years, this is because beneath everything else that we do and talk about, the nuances of policy, the realities of how much your medicine should cost, is this sense that there is a human beauty and decency and integrity of experience that must be protected. And we should not be living in a time where our government is able to extract and violate and damage and profitize the human people in this country. And when you're fighting that, it's like you're saying, you're staring into the void. It's literally, you can get vertigo if you do not have something deep within you that is grounding. And it's like, oh, this is why I'm doing this.
Right.
For all these beautiful things.
Because if you don't have something to remember, then you will get lost, because the struggle itself is very hard, and we don't always win. We oftentimes lose, and it's quite demoralizing. On the left, I feel sometimes folks give up a little bit too easy because we didn't win it and won. Well, you know what? We oftentimes don't win it in one, and our history as a movement for progress, for the ennobling side of life, not the pulling down and ripping apart and all for profit, but the ennobling side that says together we can make things better for all of us. We often lose. You look at the long story And I was gonna bring this up, but it was such a fun conversation. We could have gone.
I think you're gonna talk about the 1776 stuff, right?
1776, right?
Yeah.
And people oftentimes think of like, everything's too clean. Like eras have these start and stop dates, and it's like, oh yeah, and then it's done. But they're all built on what came before, and something that that Nolan said about being in the vanguard, and then the George Floyd murder. And then it seemed like it was all like at once. There's this moment where people are able to, but no, it was all the work that wasn't being seen that was building towards that moment. And there are times when it goes backwards. So the abolitionist movement against slavery in this country, prior to this country, in 1776, there was a huge abolitionist movement that definitely saw the birth of this country, not in the early 20th century with the birth of the nation and the uplifting of the KKK and the telling that story. There was another story that could have happened, could have been told, but didn't. And this country could have been founded on true principles, no 3/5 clause necessary, because liberty and justice would be for all. But it wasn't. It was not, and we lost then. But we can't forget that there were enormous amounts of people and dedicated people who were fighting then for abolition, and they lost. And then you have many years, and I always go to, I'm reading I just finished American Radicals, which is a great book.
I read that?
Oh, you should definitely read it.
Nice.
It's like 1817 to the Civil War and what was actually happening then. Like sometimes in history we think like, and then the Civil War happened, and you're like, well, what happened before it? Like and this is super facile, but a lot of it is that the slave owners lost. The slave owners started the Civil War because they had lost the political battle to the abolitionists, to the radical abolitionists especially, who had changed the landscape. And I think everyone knows the Lincoln is a compromise candidate, but that wasn't enough for the slave owners. It was the slave owning South who wouldn't take that, and they started the Civil War. But it's actually one story. You go from the abolitionists in 1776 who lost, well, they kept agitating. And then when they won, it was a reactionary war by the slave owning South. That's what the Civil War was. And then they lost that. Anyways, I could keep going through history, but remembering that it's one story is so important. And it's art and music and culture that has the ability to connect us to that whole story.
Well, and it's, this is one of the many things you and I relate on. You can't come at activism with a sort of facile current events cycle view of things. You do have to be a student of history and of art and realize that these things ebb and flow. And we were saying this, I think, when we were chatting with Nolan, there's this really seductive idea, like every time a year passes, we get closer to a civilized society. Like, no, it does not work like that. Just as frequently, we go way back. Look at Nazi Germany. You have this modern European country. Well, devastated by economic depression, but you get what I'm saying. And then all of a sudden, it's one of the worst authoritarian states modern history has ever known. That can happen. And now Germany is more progressive than we are. So the point being, every generation has to fight for the kind of culture and society and government they want. It's not a linear progression.
Yeah, retrograde motion doesn't exist in the stars. This is a dunking on astrology thing. Retrograde motion does not exist in astronomy, but does exist in history for sure. And something that I'm going to try to tie this all together. I could fail on this one if I don't stick the landing, but think of how many stories, small stories, that actually are so big. We don't know what, the impact of them, and so many forgotten stories. Like do you think that history is going to remember Steve Bannon's zombie with a meth problem face getting arrested off of a Chinese billionaire fugitive's yacht off the coast of Connecticut, wearing like 6 polo shirts and his boat shoes with no socks on? Is history going to remember that specifically? Like, this is the mastermind of Donald Trump's retrograde, economic nationalism married with just pure, unadulterated racism. There's no way history is going to remember Steve Bannon, but the fact that he was arrested and charged with fraud on the building a wall, it's like the perfect story of today. And I will work hard to make sure that history does not remember Steve Bannon. But it is part of what's going on today. It's an important part. And also it's very funny because that dude sucks. And that he was arrested by the Postal Service while they're trying to destroy the Postal Service you were like, okay, come on, 2020.
I mean, somebody should write the screenplay. I agree. Like, let's make Steve Bannon forgotten, but come on, I would watch that movie.
No, we don't want to watch that movie. Not Steve Bannon.
No, he would. I mean, don't you want to see the bad guys getting vanquished by our boys in blue?
Well, seeing as though he's probably going to get out. And I don't know. I am going to just sort of sit with him being arrested off of a 152-foot yacht owned by a Chinese billionaire off the coast of Connecticut, probably while he is, screaming about the East Coast or the coastal elites, which, by the way, he just means Jewish people when he says that. And he's talking about the coastal elites literally wearing the 4 polo shirts, getting arrested off a 152-foot yacht. Just that. It's not ironic. It's not hypocritical. They don't have beliefs, so they can't be hypocrites. They believe in nothing. I'm going to just sit with the fact that he was arrested by the Postal Service. It's a pure thing.
Oh, totally. And I do think you're right, though, that it is important to acknowledge the aggressive nihilism inherent to the modern Republican Party. Because these people, you're right. They're not like, wow, I just love Jesus. That's not who these people are. I got into some sort of internet conversation about this. Like, I'm sure there are tons of normal people who are just sincere, misguided idiots. But at the upper echelon of the Republican Party, all you have left are bad faith actors at this point. And we can never forget that for even a second. These are not people who sincerely believe in small government or just really love Western Christianity. No, these are people who want to dismantle the government and profit off the parts they can sell to their friends. It is explicit. You've got Donald Trump, the Disney villain, announcing his plans on TV. Like, yes, I'm gonna dismantle the Postal Service so I can win the election. Who does that? You're not supposed to say that out loud, but they do.
And then the billionaires have taken over, Facebook and the media. So we're not allowed to. He said it. You're like, he said it. It's his words. But they're like, well, he didn't mean it. And you're like, what is this?
Do you ever feel like we're in this abusive relationship with our own political structure? Like, just constant gaslighting, constant I don't want to do this anymore. You have no other choice. This is your president.
Let me just it's very specifically Social Security works. We get attacked by the right wing on Facebook, and they have a flagging campaign where they're trying to destroy the last vestiges of progressive ability to get our message out on Facebook, because Facebook is just a Nazi creation machine at this point. Zuckerberg has just gone all in. And so they flag our stuff for fact checking, and then they have right wing and elite corporate media fact checkers. We got fact checked because we said that Donald Trump said that he was going to terminate Social Security. And the word terminate was in quotes. And they fact checked it as partly false because he said he was going to terminate the dedicated revenue stream of Social Security. And yes, that would destroy Social Security, but he didn't say, and we were like, do you know that your logic is so tortured and ours is very straightforward? He said he was going to shoot Social Security, and their response was like, well, maybe he meant shoot it in the leg or wing it a little bit. He didn't mean kill it. You can't be sure. And we're like, what else would he mean?
Oh my God.
The power of that is every page that shared our graphic, they got their reach throttled, right? So then they're telling us like, hey, take down this thing because it's really hurting our page. And it's a strong arm tactic. We're sitting there, we're like, we will fight this because it's true. But they have all these other pages that they can just get rid of. And so we have to remove true things off of Facebook and the internet, which has become, the only place we can get our message out because they've destroyed so much of the ecosystem. In the meantime, they're just putting out lies and garbage, right? And Facebook,
100%.
What can we do about it? And I'm like, well, you find time to try to destroy my page. Can't you find time to stop Facebook, stop right-wing people from pushing lies and garbage and dismantling dismantling, or what am I looking for? The whole point of what they're doing is trying to lower people's faith in the results of the election. They're literally spending billions of dollars to create an echo chamber so that they can contest the election, the validity of the election. And Facebook is that effort. That's what they do.
And, it's really interesting because I think about this a lot lately. Intellectual intelligence and efficacy do not always work out. And in fact, the Republican Party are a great example of how having a lower intellectual bar can sometimes make you more effective because you're not bogged down with things like accuracy or like, well, this seems to be in my interest. I will push for it as aggressively as possible. Oh, and we have all these billionaires on our side. And we on the left, I personally don't want the billionaires, but we need to take a lesson from that and stop having like master's discussion level conversations with each other in Facebook about the most banal shit. Well, these people are tearing our country limb from limb because they're not hung up thinking about things. They're just doing it. And why are we like this, Alex? I do not understand.
There's no answer to that. But there is a solution, which is solidarity, always, that we have to understand. And it's hard because it's hard to believe what we're seeing right in front of us. It's hard to believe that there is this small group, a cabal of billionaires who profit off of the destruction of anything that works. Social Security works, so they wage a war to destroy it. Public education works, so they wage a war to destroy it. The Postal Service works, so they wage a war to destroy it. Voting works, so they wage a war to destroy it. Why? Because they fundamentally do not believe in a system where the people benefit by that system. They only want a system where the few, where this select group of billionaires are the ones who benefit. And the only way they do that is by extracting wealth from the many, which the only creation of wealth is through labor, and that is the people. And so they approach everything as a ball-peen hammer. And it's hard for people to believe, like, I don't think Mark Zuckerberg is trying to, throw the validity of the election. I can't believe that. He's got to be a better person than that. No.
Why would he be?
They don't have to be. Just because you are a decent person doesn't mean that your opponent, your billionaire opponent, is constrained by anything. In fact, as they accrued all that money, the restraints fell away from them.
Well, and there's just, I know we're almost at time, but do you want to go for 2 more hours? Brad, I do think there is a very big problem where working class people and middle class people are the worst about this because they're frequently educated and accomplished, and they're like, well, I'm sure he's a reasonable guy. Why would he be a reasonable guy? Have you read anything about this gentleman and his temperament starting at like 18? He has no interest in being reasonable. This is somebody like his billionaire peers, Jeff Bezos et al., who wants to own as much as possible. And a Democratic or a liberal or a leftist establishment that says, hey, you have to pay your taxes is in no way in these people's best interest. So if they're going to empower some Nazis on their path to complete domination, they're fine with that. They don't particularly care whether you and I can afford healthcare and higher education.
Yeah.
At all.
In fact, they don't want people to have nice things because they want cheap labor, because that is actually the goal of the billionaire class. They want a giant cheap labor pool. And they've been offshoring things, moving production out of the country and competing basically on who could find the cheapest labor. But it'd be easiest for them if they could just create a pool of cheap labor right here in America. And the only way to do that is to destroy the systems that have been put in place to ensure that working people are paid a fair wage and based on their productivity and what they create. So it's hard to imagine how easy the game field is, the playing field is. So I will say, as we're ending the show, that I love opening with the hopeful and the beautiful.
We really messed it up this show, didn't we?
No, I think we've done it twice, and I like it because it reminds us of what we're fighting for. But you remember who you're fighting against. Just Google Steve Bannon and look at that man's face as he's being arrested off of a 152-foot yacht owned by a fugitive billionaire from China. And remember that this man, Steve Bannon, and his ilk are not of the people. Their populism is a false populism. Their promise is a false promise. And it leads only to the destruction, first and foremost, of those who believe that promise. Trust no man who wears more than one polo shirt. That's what I'm going to sign off with, Jocelyn, and give you the last word. But it's truth. No man who wears more than one polo shirt should ever be trusted.
I think I need to get that tattooed somewhere. Trust no man wearing multiple. In fact, I think that's in the Bible. I can't remember which book, but you guys, as always, we love you. And it is just so important to keep fighting because the thing is, and we've said that we can win this fight. Slavery was abolished. Women did get the right to vote. The Voting Rights Act was passed. These are all winnable fights. Through solidarity, we can do all things. We just have to stay focused and listen to some dope music so we don't lose our minds in the process. Thank you so much. We'll see you next Friday.
See you next Friday.